So I want to discuss leadership and hopefully give a slightly different perspective on a few critical elements of leadership. And so this is based on presentations that I gave at the Harvard Kennedy School a couple of years ago. But fundamentally, the point is it's not a simple formula, and as I say, it's not a math problem. So what we want to cover is to discuss in more detail, well, if it's not a math problem, what is it, right? There's a lot of formulas for successful management. So what does successful management and successful leadership really mean? And of course, we'll get into some of the real elements, which management usually involves discomfort. You have to learn, you have to create, and that has to permeate the organization that you are leading, right? And so communication really matters, but of course we'll get into it's not so much what you say, but what people perceive, and that perception is based on several dimensions, some of which tend to be ignored. And then we'll talk about a concept of true north, right? What is the thing that is always guiding you, always in the same direction, and essentially values that are inviolate. And that's essential for any leadership to convey, and also any leader to understand himself. And of course, we'll get into some elements of leadership. It's not all, glory. In fact, most of the time you're dealing with disagreements, you're dealing with some issues and some challenges, disappointments, and of course you experience despair much more than people are willing to even admit. So it's not a math problem. One of the things that we react to is that there's so many formulas that say, well, if you just do this, that, define a problem, get people together, get them on the same side, determine what we're going to do and how we're going to do it, and you're a successful leadership. Well, that rarely works, right? Algorithms are not useful, mostly because you're in a dynamic competitive environment, right? And so more importantly, and the thing that gets ignored most by people when they talk about forming organizations and being a leader, is you have to start with who. And we'll get into, getting to know you as an individual and a leader, but also the people that you surround yourself with. More than anything, before you get to your purpose, before you get to why you're doing what you're doing, and then what you're going to do and how you're going to do it, you need to understand the qualities of the people that you're working with, because it's people who do things, right? It's not concepts, it's not formulas, it's not, a straightforward task. It's people, and you have to involve with the right people, the right team, work collegially, which probably matters more than anything, and that gets down to who more than anything. And of course, you need to have your purpose so that there's a reason why you're all doing this, and you can focus that purpose and then figure out what to do and how to do it. But knowing that you'll always be in an environment of uncertainty, right? It's the things that worked today that might not work in the future. Technology evolves, competitive environments evolve, things change, right? We can point to so many great companies like, let's take Kodak, let's take Polaroid, let's take Blockbuster, let's take all these companies with world-leading technologies and business models that ultimately failed because they ran into uncertainties, they ran into changes, and they weren't able to adapt. So one of the things that you confront as a leader is discomfort all the time, because there are unforeseen challenges, there's fundamental changes to what you do, and knowing that you will be uncomfortable, and then how to deal with that, which means learning, which means understanding, which means trying to convey information, but also absorb information, right? And so an organization creates. An organization does not make things, it creates. It creates a business, right? And value is given by consumers. When people consume your product, that's how you create value. You don't create value by making a product, right? And so you're creating something that you hope will be considered valuable by consumers. And that's the challenge, because that ends up being a loop of information, modification, uncertainty, and then the need to address those issues and create maybe something better. But that creates even more discomfort because you're changing your organization. So when I think about it, there's a couple of things. One is, there's the Facebook adage, which is, move fast and break things. Well, I disagree with that. Doing a lot of things isn't necessarily being efficient, nor is it being fast. And so, as a drummer, one of the things you're taught is if you really want to learn how to go fast, go slow. If you go slowly, you'll understand what is really required for every motion, and you won't waste motion, right? You don't want to be an organization that's a Tasmanian devil zipping around doing all these crazy things, thinking that you're making progress because you're doing things quickly. That isn't real progress compared to doing things slowly, methodically, not wasting effort, not wasting motion, picking your roles specifically with real purpose. And then, of course, putting energy into those things. But that's how you go fast, by going slowly, right? And what your organization, one of the things that Steve Jobs has said when he talked about his role, he said, "I'm really the orchestra conductor, right? I'm just there to have everybody play their parts when they need to, etc." Well, I understand what he's trying to convey, but you're really not an orchestra, because an orchestra has very defined tasks, very defined roles. It's there on the sheet music, right? You know what you're supposed to do. You just need to get cued as to when to do it, right? That's not what a company really is. And I'll say, using that same analogy, a company is really a jazz ensemble, right? It's a jazz ensemble where you've got a structure, you know where you want to go, but you have to cue off of each other. You have to create together, sometimes create in real time. Sometimes you go in a direction that you didn't think you were going to go, but it makes sense now. You started in one area, you went to another area. You really have become this ongoing creative performance. And more than anything, a company is a creative performance, and the leader is the one sort of guiding that performance. So now when we talk about communication, a leader's role is probably communication first and foremost, right? But now it's not what you say, right? Because one of the things that we sort of push against is there are these well-scripted statements, especially when bad things happen. Well-scripted statements that are trying to convey a message, but it's not what you say, it's what people perceive, right? So I'd say whenever you're giving a presentation, it's like, I don't care what you say, it's what do they remember, right? But what they remember is not only what you said, they also remember the authenticity behind that message. And that's the real problem. Think of the BP oil spill. One of the true problems with the CEO of BP, as he was trying to explain what was happening and the issues, is he just seemed so inauthentic. He may have meant it, but it didn't come off that way, right? And so a message really has multiple components. And, as a part Greek, I can say, these Greek words, ethos, logos, and pathos. What they mean is character, reason, and empathy. And this is what a communication from a leader really needs to be. First and foremost, your character. Do you mean it, right? If you're giving a message and it seems that you are not sincere, you're saying something that somebody in the marketing department told you to say, or you're up there and you don't really have the internal message and you don't really believe it, it will come through. Your character means a lot. And it's not only the quality of your character, but the sincerity of what you're saying. And people can perceive that clearly, right? And then the other is the reason. What I mean by that is, do we really know why we're doing what we're doing? Well, you have to convey that. There's a reason why we're doing this. There are things that the organization does that people may not like, and we'll get into that, where you'll confront lots of areas of disappointment and disagreement. But let's look at Apple and Newton, right? So the Newton product, it was great. It was a great product. When Steve Jobs came back to Apple, he stopped that product. And a lot of people did not like that, right? But he had a reason why. He made it very clear. This is our highest priority. These three products are the only products we're going to produce, and here's why. We need to recover, we need to generate cash flow, we need to be a real business and reestablish ourselves, and this is our best way of doing it. So he conveyed that reason, and people were able to embrace that. And then finally, there's empathy, right? And it's not that, I feel for you, right? It's like, I really believe this, but I have the emotion to understand that it takes a team and a collegial environment to enable that. And that is an emotional connection. You have to create that feeling that people are connected to what you believe, and they are willing to believe that with you and willing to focus with you. And that's really the heart of effective communication, which is, again, probably one of the key roles that any leader is going to play. So I talk about the pebble effect, right? Which is, very classically, right? A pebble drops in water and all the waves resonate. So as a leader, what you do resonates. So all of these elements, your character, your reasoning, what you think, how you think, the emotions you have behind it, all of that ripples out through an organization. So if an organization is collegial, if it's driven, if it has shared visions, then all of that gets rippled out in the right direction. So now this topic, I think is very important. It's the sense of, we call it true north. right? And what we're really getting at is no matter where you are, there is a true north. There's only one true north. And so what is it that you are willing to say, I will never compromise these things? And this is very important because we will always face circumstances where we compromise what we thought was inviolate. And we do that because we think we're serving a greater good. And, as someone who's personally made that mistake, I'm here to say, don't ever do that, right? It's easy to say, well, I've been bitten. Don't be bitten, right? But there is something very important to, in advance, say, these are the elements of the true north. This is why I am, right? And that's why I sort of get to that why I am. It's not some French philosophical question. It really gets at, there is a purpose to you. There are values that you have. There's a character you have. That is inviolate. That is who you are. And people will understand that, right? They will, I say, you must be you. People will understand you are being you. You are being authentic. There may be elements about you that maybe we don't like so much, but we know you mean it, right? And people will accept, we're all human, right? They will accept your shortcomings. They will accept your issues because they know that fundamentally you are trying to be the best person you can be, and you are being as authentic as you can be, and you have certain standards and that you are just not going to violate. And an organization can get around that, right? And so you lead, I say, from the inside out and the outside in, right? Who you are resonates out. And then absorbing the organization and what's happening comes into you. And you can process that and resonate that out again. And these are very challenging things to do, but when focused, they can be the elements of great leadership, right? And so those elements of great leadership combine this authenticity, this sense of purpose. It gives you and the organization a singular purpose and a singular focus. And that, what I mean by singular focus is not a single thing to do. It means that everything we do has this purpose, and we have focused ourselves on it. And that can make all the difference between success and not for any organization. So now one of the critical elements of leadership, which people don't really talk about much, and that is that you are going to confront disagreement, disappointment, and despair, and then the courage that it takes to deal with all that. So first, disagreement. There will always be disagreements, right? And settling a disagreement doesn't mean that you pick the right choice and then therefore that's that, right? Because there are people that still feel very strongly about maybe the opposing choice. And so you have to manage that. And managing disagreement is a large part of your responsibility because you want people to understand, yes, there are differences, there's reasons why we're making choices. And a friend of mine who is the CEO of a very large corporation, he said, well, even though I know what I want to do, I lead from behind. I have to make sure everybody else gets on board. And we begin with disagreements. We begin with people wanting to do different things. And they essentially talk each other into the right choice. So everyone buys into it. And if people haven't owned it, believed in it, and are willing to participate in it, you're not going to get implementation of a good choice. Good choices are only the beginning. It's the implementation that makes all the difference, right? And then disappointment. People will be disappointed. Let's go back to the Newton example. There were very smart people, maybe among the best and brightest at Apple, working on Newton and really believing in that product. They'll be very disappointed when you cut that product off. So how do you manage that and keep those great people working with you and focused on your mission, right? And there's a great line, General Eisenhower talked about this regarding D-Day, right? This incredible operation of logistics and planning, etc. But once it started, he said, I had to change things dramatically, otherwise it wouldn't be successful. So going to people and saying, look, you've trained for maybe a year to do this. Now you're not doing that. You have to do this now because things have changed. That's managing disappointment. Now that's an extreme example, but we see that kind of disappointment where you've got a great plan, you've worked hard at it, now you're trying to implement it. And remember, implementation matters more than a plan, right? So you're trying to implement, and as Mike Tyson says, every plan is great till you get punched in the face. Then what do? Well, you have to manage that. And what's going to happen is you're going to manage some very disappointed people sometimes. And things need to change. Sometimes things need to be let go that people were depending on. That's very difficult to do, right? And then finally, something that I think is very important that's underestimated, which is you as a leader are going to deal with despair. Because there's no such thing as the heartless chief executive who lays off people and doesn't really care. It's probably, any leader will tell you the worst day of their professional lives is when they had to lay off people, right? It's dramatic and it's terrible. And I've got one example. When I was going through the program at Harvard, I got a chance to talk to the former president of Colombia. So he won a Nobel Prize for striking the peace agreement with the FARC rebels. And he told me he was in such great despair because even though that might be viewed as a success, what it was more than anything was letting murderers go free. But he believed it was the best decision for his country, but it's not something that he could ever be comfortable with. And it created great despair. So success can create despair, but you'll always be disappointed. You'll always have to make decisions that will make you not only uncomfortable, but sometimes it's just very emotional, and you have to manage that. And a true leader understands this, tries to manage it, but it's very challenging. And that's really the final point. That's why it fundamentally takes courage. It takes courage to be a leader. It takes courage to deal with disappointment, to deal with despair, to deal with disagreements, to deal with all that. You need to have the fortification to be able to say, well, I've galvanized my vigilance. This is what matters. And if you have all these other capabilities and all these other qualities, people understand you have your true north. They understand you have your willingness to listen, willingness to lead, willingness to learn, willingness to create. When you have all of those things and your character and what you stand for and the purpose behind the organization are well understood, that takes courage. People acknowledge that and people will follow that. And that really maybe more than anything defines true leadership. So as we say, it's no simple formula. If you've got a formula, you'll learn to ignore it very quickly, right? Leadership is a lot about discomfort. It's a lot about learning, and you have to create. An organization is a creation, and it constantly creates, but you need to communicate, because as things change and as things are created, everyone needs to be on the same page, because communication really leads to effective implementation. And it's the effective implementation that defines success. And that's what a leader really is there for. He or she has his true values, his inviolate character. And that, is only a few things, but that is essential. You're willing to make decisions and modify and create and change and revisit and learn again. But there are certain sets of values that you just will not compromise. And it is very easy to compromise those values, because it's very easy to talk yourself into saying, I'm really serving the greater good here, when you aren't really serving the greater good. And so you'll always manage disagreements, disappointments, despair, but it takes courage, and ultimately it's courage that creates the best leadership.